Bueno, ya tenemos un público bastante nutrido, así que si les parece, para hacer honor al tiempo que nos hemos dado para esta conversación, que es realmente muy cortita teniendo en cuenta todo lo que tenemos para conversar sobre estas estimaciones, podemos ir dando inicio. Yo quiero agradecer la presencia de Susana Chávez, la secretaria ejecutiva de CLACAI, de Jonathan Mark Bickrack, investigador principal de Guttmacher Institute a cargo de la investigación, Guillermo Ortiz, que nos acompaña, experto regional de IPAS, Rafaela Schiavón, también experta independiente que nos acompaña para esta conversación, y Fátima Juárez, que la estoy viendo ahí también, que nos va a acompañar en el panel para discutir sobre estas estimaciones relacionadas con la interrupción del embarazo en nuestra región. Yo quisiera, antes de empezar, darle la palabra a Susana para hacer la apertura de este ciclo de encuentros que estamos realizando en esta colaboración entre la iniciativa La Salud Reproductiva es Vital de CLACAI y el Guttmacher Institute, que nos acompaña Sara Keo, quien es nuestra contraparte del instituto y con quien hemos venido trabajando en esta iniciativa ya desde hace un tiempo. Así que muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos y le dejo la palabra a Susana.
Muchísimas gracias, Sonia. De verdad, para mí es un enorme placer, un orgullo que hagamos esta primera conversación, como tú bien señalas, de un ciclo de conversaciones que tenemos pendiente para ir indagando sobre el tema de los números, la data, que es tan importante para las acciones de incidencia. Y como sabemos, Alan Guttmacher ha sido un pionero en esta actividad. Creo que todos y todas que trabajamos en el campo nos hemos nutrido a lo largo de estos años de contar con la evidencia que nos ha facilitado muchas veces generar inicios de conversaciones, debates y acciones de incidencia en cada uno de nuestros países. De hecho, para nosotros es un enorme placer que además se haga en el marco de la salud reproductiva es vital, porque si bien es cierto, es una iniciativa que se origina en el marco de la pandemia, ha generado un conjunto de elementos para ir pensando y fortaleciendo las actividades de incidencia. En ese sentido, creo que tenemos un hermoso recurso y invitamos a que puedan seguir visitando porque se va a seguir trabajando en el marco de esta acción y esta plataforma para poner a disposición de todas y todos y todes que puedan seguir haciendo incidencia basada en evidencias, que es finalmente este propósito. Muchísimas gracias a todos quienes acompañan y especialmente al panel y a Alan Guttmacher por esta hermosa contribución.
Muchísimas gracias, Susana. Sí, así como nos comentaba Susana, estamos en este primer encuentro sobre las estimaciones realizadas por el Guttmacher Institute acerca de el embarazo no intencional y el aborto en nuestra región. Es una conversación que empezó ya hace unos meses cuando nos reunimos en Lima con algunas de las personas que están presentes para el primer encuentro de tomadores y tomadoras de decisión de nuestra región acerca de el acceso al aborto seguro. Y en el marco de esa conversación discutimos un poco acerca de los números, acerca de estas estimaciones que nos acerca el instituto, y allí se nos plantearon algunas dudas y algunas cuestiones relevantes para la discusión en torno a la metodología y a la incidencia con estos datos. Así que hoy nos vamos a dar este primer encuentro para trabajar en profundidad sobre la metodología que ha utilizado el estudio y para que podamos conversar acerca de los límites y los desafíos que puede tener, pero también del enorme potencial que nos ofrece utilizar metodología estandarizada que pueda ser comparable y que nos permita tener datos para el entorno global y para nuestro entorno regional. Así que sin más, yo quisiera darle la palabra a Jonathan. Recuerden que tienen traducción simultánea, que la pueden activar en sus pantallas en la barra inferior para poder escuchar esta presentación. Jonathan, adelante. Muchas gracias.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting my colleagues and I here to talk about our research. I apologize. I'm recovering from COVID, so please excuse me throughout the presentation. I'm just not at 100 yet. I'm talking somewhat low because I'm recovering. So if I need to change the gain on my microphone, I just want to pause in case that would be helpful. Just let me know. I hope you'll understand that. Just please assume that in ideal circumstances that I would have practiced this 100,000 times, that I would have cut my text and deleted it and rewrote it and made it much shorter and more concise, and made the slides really, really nice and clean. But I'm probably going to be a little bit long-winded because I haven't been able to sort of concentrate enough to make things as concise as I normally like to. So thanks for bearing with me. And thank you so much for inviting us here to talk about our research. And I think the panel will include Anna, who's a colleague of mine and a co-author on this study. So let's see. Okay, so everyone should be able to see my slides. This is a presentation about how my team and I estimated abortion worldwide, with a focus on Latin America. Several weeks ago, Sarah Keogh presented some findings from this research. The presentation I prepared today is a different kind of presentation. Whereas that presentation was about what we found, today's presentation is about how we produced the estimates and how to interpret them. In summary, I've been asked to give a technical talk, but I've also been asked to be mindful that not everyone in this audience has statistical training. So I'm certainly glad to give a talk that's much more in depth about our statistical methods. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions. This slide shows our abortion incidence estimates for Mexico. Abortion rates are expressed as the number of abortions per 1,000 women ages 15 to 49 per year. The estimates are for each of the 5-year periods from 1990 to 2019. This means that the earliest estimate is for 1990 to 1994, and the latest estimate is for 2015 to 2019. The rates are annual averages. For example, if you look at the right side of the chart, you'll see an abortion rate of 31. This means that during the 5-year period, there occurred within each individual year, on average, 31 abortions per 1,000 women ages 15 to 49. On this plot in the color olive, you see the estimates produced by our model. The solid lines represent our median estimates. You can also refer to these as point estimates. The shaded regions represent uncertainty intervals. The darker shaded regions represent 80% uncertainty intervals, and then they get even wider. So the lighter regions represent 95% intervals. The probability that the true value, the true abortion rate, is within the 95% interval is 95%. The probability that the true value, the true abortion rate, is outside the interval is 5%. There is an equal probability that the true value lies below and above the interval. This means that there is a 2.5% chance that the true abortion rate is below the interval, and the same chance that the true abortion rate is above the interval. The median estimate, the one that people use most often, that's our best estimate. But the true abortion rate is almost certainly not this value. It's the center of a statistical probability distribution. Their interpretation of the point estimate is that there's an equal probability that the true abortion rate is on either side of the point estimate. That's what we mean by producing statistically unbiased estimates. In summary, we used a statistical model to produce probabilistic estimates, and the uncertainty in these estimates is very important to us. Now, also on this plot, you can see abortion rates which were input into the model. You can think of this as the data. You'll notice that the legend refers to the data as model inputs and uses the term estimates to describe the data. This is because it's not just that our model produces estimates, it's also that the information input into our model are also themselves estimates. This is one of the reasons that the circles on this plot don't perfectly fall along the lines. The lines are the output of the model. They are the model-based estimates. The circles are estimates from abortion incidence studies. You'll also see a couple of triangles. These triangles point upwards. They're described as minimum estimates. By this, we mean that the true value is unlikely lower than this value. The minimum estimates in this graph refer to official statistics from Mexico. This shows that we do use all available data, but the limitations of the data are input into the model. As you can see, the information from the official statistics is used, but in this case, it's not very informative. The uncertainty intervals are nowhere close to the official statistics. The estimates are instead close to the three circles, which represent values reported from abortion incidence studies. As you can see, the uncertainty intervals become wider when the information is scarcer. So if you can see where my mouse is, here's where we have estimates. The width of the intervals is relatively narrow. We also have an estimate in the early 90s that intervals are relatively narrow. So the uncertainty intervals are narrowest for the time periods corresponding to the years in which abortion incidence studies were conducted. They're slightly wider in the intervening years in which abortion incidence studies were conducted. Right here. They're wider after 2010 and even wider later on after 2015. This is because of a lack of investment in abortion incidence research, not just in Mexico, but in Latin America as a whole for more than a decade. This study right here for Mexico, published in 2012, producing a point estimate for the year 2009, that is the most recent abortion incidence study in the entire Latin America region in the scientific peer-reviewed published literature that exists. There were several over the 20-year period beginning in the 1990s, but since then, funding for abortion incidence research has shifted to other parts of the world for reasons that I do not comprehend. So let's talk about this data that was put into the model. On the previous slide, I explained that the data input into the model were themselves estimates. I explained that this was one of the reasons that the model produced estimates which differed slightly from the estimates from the studies published in the literature. This picture of an iceberg with part of the ice visible and part of the ice hidden below the waterline illustrates the concept of an indirect estimate from an abortion incidence study. The visible part of the ice above the waterline represents the direct estimate. This comes from a survey of health facilities in the country. Information from health facilities is used to calculate an estimate of the number of complications from unsafe abortions that were treated in health facilities. The reason that abortion incidence studies are described as using an indirect estimation technique is that the rest of the abortions to occur are hidden. To estimate the total number of abortions, these studies estimate of all abortions, how many resulted in a complication, and of these, how many were treated in the health facility. Suppose this proportion is 1 out of 3. The reciprocal of 1/3 is 3. These studies refer to this as the multiplier. If you multiply the number of complications by this multiplier, then you get an estimate of the total number of abortions. Now, there's an unknown amount of uncertainty associated with this indirect component. This is because this information is computed from a survey of knowledgeable informants. In summary, these in-country studies provide the best information we have on abortion incidence in the country. They provide more thorough estimates than we're going to talk about with this model, which just produces incidence estimates. These studies have a lot richer information beyond just what the national level abortion rates are. But what's important to understand right now is that our model doesn't quite treat these estimates as gospel for the reason I just explained. And that's why even in the years where we have these studies, you still saw fairly wide uncertainty intervals. And this is also why the model-based estimates differ ever so slightly from the estimates from the studies, even though it was aware of those studies' estimates. So how do we produce estimates? Well, our model doesn't just estimate abortion. It concurrently estimates pregnancies by intention and outcome. This means that we estimate the numbers of intended and unintended pregnancies for each country and time period and how each of these pregnancies ended. The United Nations produces estimates of family planning indicators. These are represented in the left panel. So these are produced by the Population Division in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. They produce these estimated family planning indicators as part of their mandate for the Sustainable Development Goals. They estimate the number of women who are of reproductive age, and they do this by estimating the number of women who are between the ages of 15 to 49, which is used as a proxy for reproductive age. They also estimate the proportion of women who are married. Now, married is something of a euphemism. In large international survey programs, what's really being ascertained is whether a woman lives with a man. So to be clear, that's what's meant here by marriage. The reason for this is that it's used as a proxy for sexual activity. This is relevant because we're trying to ascertain differences in the probability of experiencing a pregnancy. Separately, by marital status, they estimate the proportions of women who are defined as having a need for contraception. This refers to women who report that they do not want to become pregnant within 2 years. Of those, they also estimate the proportion using contraception. So these key family planning indicators, marital status, contraceptive need and use, are, along with abortion, key proximate determinants of fertility. For these reasons, we employed a theoretical framework in which we ascribe intended pregnancies to women with quote unquote no need for contraception and unintended pregnancies to the other population groups. The probability of pregnancy differs across each of these population groups, and our statistical model estimates group-specific pregnancy rates. These are represented by the Greek letter omega. With the subscripts F for population group, C for country, and T for 5-year time periods. We also model for each of these groups the proportions ending in abortion, represented by the Greek letter alpha. Now, pregnancies end in abortions, live births, and fetal losses. For ease of exposition, let's momentarily put aside the fetal losses and just focus on the abortions and live births and pretend fetal losses don't exist. Well, if that were the case, then if we knew the number of unintended pregnancies and we knew the corresponding numbers of births, we could simply subtract to get the number of abortions. We have data on unintended births, by which I mean unintended pregnancies that ended in births. And we have estimates from the UN, which were produced from the same survey data from which we processed the intent and status of births on predictors of unintended pregnancy. Now, if those family planning indicators perfectly predicted unintended pregnancy rates, then we could, as I explained, simply subtract births from the corresponding unintended pregnancy rates. And we'd know the number of abortions that happened. The thing is, while these family planning indicators, contraceptive need and use by marital status, are key determinants of pregnancy, they are imperfectly measured, imperfectly estimated, and they are incomplete predictors. We do also have data that we use on which methods of contraception women were using, and we also use this information in the model. But still, there's a number of unobserved influences on the rates of pregnancy that each of the subgroups shown in the graph will experience. For this reason, these group-specific pregnancy rates will vary among countries and between time periods. The percent of pregnancies ending in abortion would differ among countries and between time periods due to factors like differences in motivation to avoid a birth, access to abortion, social, cultural differences. This means that if the data suggest a greater or smaller unintended birth rate than would be expected given the otherwise expected unintended pregnancy rate, the model needs to express uncertainty as to the extent to which this means that the relationship between these predictors, the family planning indicators, and unintended pregnancy rates differ for that country and time period, or the extent to which it's the percent of pregnancies ending in abortion that differ, or maybe the extent to which this is about measurement error in some of these data sources. We do this using a Bayesian hierarchical model. This is a simplified summary of our model. The letter F indexes the 6 subgroups I described in the previous slide based on marital and family planning status. We use the letter F because these groups are delineated by family planning indicators. We have for each country C, period T, and population group F, the number of women W. Which is treated as fixed. And we model the subgroup-specific pregnancy rates omega and proportions ending in abortion alpha. We assume from limited data on life tables by gestational age that there is a fetal loss for every 5 births, or 2 fetal losses for every 10 births, and 1 fetal loss for every 10 induced abortions. To be clear, whenever I say abortion, I always mean an induced abortion. If I make this assumption, then I can calculate a subgroup-specific birth rate from the corresponding probabilities of pregnancy and abortion. So as this equation here shows, the model subtracts from the pregnancy rate 1.1 times the corresponding abortion rate. The abortion rate here being expressed in this equation by alpha times omega. So if there's a fetal loss for every 10 abortions, then if you subtract from the pregnancy rate 1.1 times the abortion rate, the remainder would be the corresponding births plus the 2 fetal losses for every 10 births. Hence, we divide by 1.2. So using this relationship, we can model parameters for pregnancy rates and abortion probabilities for each subgroup. And from these parameters, calculate the corresponding abortion and birth rates. And the of births that were from unintended as opposed to intended pregnancies, those being the outcomes which are actually observed in the input data. So to compute estimates from our model of the total number of pregnancies, we simply multiply the number of women in each subgroup by their subgroup specific rates and sum these up. We do the same thing for the numbers of abortions. And the proportions of events by intention and marital status are just arithmetic functions of all of these parameters that I've described to you: the numbers of women W, the subgroup specific pregnancy rates omega, the proportions of pregnancies ending in abortion alpha, and the birth rates theta. So the next question is, how do we actually fit these models to the data, these parameters to the data? For all country periods, we have the numbers of women and the total numbers of births, which were estimated by the United Nations. For a subset of country periods, we have data on births by intention and/or marital status and abortions. We programmed a Bayesian hierarchical time series, which jointly models the pregnancy rates, the omegas, and the percents ending in abortion, the alphas, with countries grouped into clusters and subclusters. One of the implications of clustering countries is that the modeled parameters for each country are drawn from distributions with means shared by other countries in the same subcluster. Corresponding statements can be made about subclusters and clusters and the world. Now, to model the time trends, we used a random walk. A random walk means that the parameters for any two adjacent periods are directly correlated. It follows from this that the parameters for all other periods are indirectly correlated. On this slide, I show an example hierarchical time series for a subgroup-specific pregnancy rate. Now, this relates the country-specific trend to the subcluster average trend. The subgroup-specific pregnancy rate for subgroup F, country C, period T, is drawn from a distribution whose mean is calculated as follows. We take the modeled parameter from the reference time period, in this case T minus 1, and then we add a new value called delta. This value, delta, is calculated by taking the difference between the subcluster means for periods T and T minus 1. Hence, the difference between any two time periods for a country is related to the adjacent periods for this country, as well as the subcluster average differences, or the subcluster average trends. And to be clear, I'm not talking about trends in the pregnancy rates or the abortion rates. I'm talking about the modeled parameters. Now, as I mentioned, all of the model parameters for each population group and outcome are allowed to vary by country and time period. This means that our model is data-driven. The model parameters will vary in order that the model produces estimates which line up with the observed data, except that the model estimates may differ because of uncertainty in the underlying data. In other words, the model weights all available data on the predictors of pregnancy and all available data on pregnancy outcomes, accounting for the quality of these data to come up with its ultimate prediction. This flowchart explains how we treated abortion data input into our model. We have a lot of flowcharts. I'm only going to look at this one, and I'm not going to look through it in total detail. Now, let's look at the top of the flowchart. We start by asking, do these data come from a special population sample? And if so, we exclude it from our model. This never actually came up, but the point is you have to make a study protocol in advance, and you have to treat all of the data according to a consistent set of rules from all countries. And it has to be documented and explained clearly for reproducibility and for transparency with the countries about what you did with their information. So starting from here, we get to the most important next question. What was the source of the data? Well, let's start with what we do if it's from official statistics. We ask a series of questions. Is legal abortion broadly available? Does the government acknowledge the statistics are incomplete? Is the official statistic below the estimate from a survey of women? Most abortions aren't reported when you ask a woman in a survey. So if the official statistic is even smaller than that, it's quite a ways below the truth. Do a sizable proportion of abortions occur outside the health sector? After a review of outlying data for implausible levels of trends, can it be ascertained that the country's data are incomplete? The answer to any one of those questions can indicate that we should treat the data as a minimum. This means that we use the data, but it just tells the model that the true value is unlikely smaller than the observed value. It could be anywhere above that observation. Otherwise, the data are usually treated as point estimates, which, by the way, also have uncertainty depending on the quality of the vital registration system. Sometimes the data may also contain spontaneous abortions. In these cases, we subtract a proportion of the value based on the observed value of abortions and births, and we use that shrunken value as a minimum estimate of the true incidence of abortions. And then if the abortions are not otherwise shown to be incomplete, we take the original value and treat it as a maximum estimate of the number of induced abortions. Ergo, with a minimum and a maximum, we call that a range. That's very rare. It doesn't come up in Latin America anyway. Suppose the data are from a published study. We first ask whether it employed a national probability sample. And this informs how much uncertainty is modeled for the data, and in a couple of cases, but not in Latin America, the direction of bias. We then ask what method did the study use. If it was a survey of women, it's almost certainly an underestimate. There are some cases where we do use surveys of women as point estimates, but with modeled bias terms. But we don't have sufficient data to model bias terms for that in Latin America. And so, like incomplete official statistics, these would just be treated as minimum estimates. Okay. Now we have several in-country studies for Latin America. And these all used indirect estimation technique, like I described at the beginning of the presentation. We enter into these models what these studies refer to as the multiplier, the number they multiply complications by to get the true abortion rate, and separately, the number of complications from the health facility surveys. We model error terms for the multiplier and for the complications. And this is to reflect that there's uncertainty in each of these components of the study. And as a result, we're more certain about the lower limit, like clearly, at least this many abortions occurred, like if those complications were like directly observed. But we're less certain about the true total abortion rate. And so for this reason, you might actually see more uncertainty above than below one of our point estimates, for example. Some studies might also include additional information on legal abortions, which we can also include as minimum estimates. And so that, roughly speaking, is how we classify different sources of abortion data. So next, let's look at some data from Mexico. Here's a case study. The estimates from the Juarez and Singh paper published in 2012 for the year 2009. The most recent study, unfortunately, sadly, in the entire region. So Juarez and Singh produced an abortion estimate of 38. They estimated that 38 abortions occurred each year in 2009 for every 1,000 women ages 15 to 44. Our model-based estimate was 31. Now, our estimate is for women ages 15 to 49. We have to use the same proxy of reproductive age, 15 to 49, for every country. So that's one of the reasons our number is so different from the study. It's also why, if you look on this chart, it doesn't look that different, the study versus our model-based estimate, because we're showing you the harmonized value. But you might say, well, how many women between ages 45 and 49 can there be that we're going to get such a different estimate? Well, Juarez and Singh, like any abortion incidence study, estimate the number of abortions, and then they divide by an estimate for the number of women. They didn't use the same estimate source that we did. They estimated that there were 1 million, well, you can see the precise number, but about 1 million abortions occurred in Mexico in 2009, 1025669. The United Nations estimated that there were 31 million, 30,940,883, 31 million women ages 15 to 49. If we take their exact number of abortions and we divide that number by the number of women from the UN and we multiply by 1,000, we get 33. So the comparable value for use in comparing to all other studies, to all their time periods, to all their countries, is not 38, but 33. The model-based estimate is slightly different, 31 versus 33, but not very different. What you can see in the graph on the right is a comparison between the model-based estimate and the data. Published studies are in blue. Official statistics are in yellow. The triangles pointed upward reflect that these are minimum estimates, the official statistics. The published studies are point estimates. That's why they're shown in diamonds in the observed value. The blue lines represent the 80% and 95% uncertainty intervals that we model for the study. Because we attribute uncertainty to the study, the model is allowed to weight other information that it has to produce a slightly different estimate, which is 31. Let's look at Peru. So here on the left, you can see abortion incidence estimates from our model. And the gray shaded regions show the uncertainty intervals. They're darkest for the 80% intervals, and then the even lighter shading extends outward to show you the 95% intervals. You can see that the model-based estimates hew very, very closely to the published studies and are way, way higher than the official statistics. On the right-hand side, you can see some of the other information that we have. So for example, we have the percent of births that were marital. And that's in the top left quadrant. So you can see the model-based estimates for those proportions compared to the raw data for these proportions. And you can also see that there's a great deal of uncertainty in the proportions from the data. Some of the data also show like shaded regions going from left to right. So in general, what we do is we process the raw data, we take the birth history file, we compute for births that occurred in the previous year, what proportion of births were unintended. Sometimes we aren't able to do that. Maybe it's from a DHS report. We don't have access to the raw data, and they use all of the births to occur in the birth history file. Maybe births to children 3 years old, maybe births to children 5 years old. So it's covering a longer time period for that reason. We also, in those cases, estimate a bias term to make that data comparable to the raw data when we process it to look for only children up to the age of 1. So there's a number of other things I'm not talking about today regarding all types of data that we do. That if you just processed it and took a value, you might not get the same value that we do, because we do a lot of things to make the data comparable and treat so that you're not comparing 3 years of births from one study to 1 year of births from another study, or maybe one value that includes some pregnancies. It has to be births from the last year, and if not, it has to be modeled with bias terms. On the right side, you're seeing data from the survey, the DHS surveys, on the percent of births that were of intended births that were to women that were marital, and also on the bottom, percent of unintended births that were marital. These are ranges. That's why you have arrows pointing upward and arrows pointing downward. You might know that in the DHS, they ask the date of first union. If a birth occurred before the first union, it's non-marital. If the woman's never been married, it's non-marital. If the birth occurred after the first union, maybe it's marital. What if she's no longer in her first marriage? We only have the date of the first union, not when it ended, not when a subsequent union started. So that's why we have ranges here, to give you the two scenarios of whether you include or exclude post-marital births to women who are no longer in their first marriage. And so you can see we're very careful to not make strong assumptions about the data and to let the data speak about what it actually means. All right. So this is more from Peru.
You have like other 7 minutes, just for you to know. Sorry.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Sonia. Thank you. So you can see in gray the modeled unintended pregnancy rates. You see a decline from 138 in the early 1990s to a rate of 90 in 2015 to 19. The probabilities below the lines, this is comparing to the region where there's no number shown. So in other words, there's a 99% chance that the unintended pregnancy rate has declined over the analysis period. You can see the uncertainty intervals are smallest where we also had abortion data. You can see that we have estimated unintended birth rates and unintended birth rates, both of which were declining throughout this period, and for which the uncertainty intervals are much more narrower because we have much more data about those outcomes than we do about abortions. You can see that the birth rates were declining in general, but the unintended birth rate was declining more in Peru. So if you go back to the abortion rate, which is relatively stable during a period of a declining unintended pregnancy rate and a declining unintended birth rate, the implication is the model thinks that the percent of unintended pregnancies ending in abortion in Peru went up. So let's compare two countries that I just showed you, Peru and Mexico. This is the abortion rate. Peru is in olive, Mexico is in navy blue. The difference is in orange. In 2015 to 2019, on average, the estimated abortion rate for Peru was 42. In Mexico, 31, a difference of 12. Was Peru's abortion rate higher than Mexico's? Probably. The chance is 83% that it was. There's also a 17% chance that it wasn't. In the year in which we did have data, you can see we're much more certain. So in 2000 to 2004, we are 99% certain that Peru's abortion rate was greater than in Mexico. But due to the lack of data, not just in those countries, but in Latin America in general, uncertainty increases as we come towards the present. So these comparisons have to be made probabilistically. What was I looking at? Oh, yes, unintended pregnancy rates. So this is the trend in unintended pregnancy rates comparing Peru and Mexico. So what you can see here is even with lacking abortion data, we're still able to, so like for the abortion rate, I'm only 83% sure that Peru's abortion rate was higher than Mexico's in the most recent time period. But I'm 98% sure that Peru's unintended pregnancy rate was higher than Mexico's. I have family planning indicators that predict unintended pregnancy. I have data on births. I have data on how many births were unintended. So we're able to make those comparisons with much more certainty than comparing the abortion rates. And so these values, these percents, are just comparing time period by time period, the two unintended pregnancy rates for each country. And this web address, gutt/model, you can go there and click some buttons and it'll spit out this graph for you. Here's El Salvador. So I just wanted to show you a country where there's no abortion data. And also just this country has some other data. And you can see it's from the multiple indicator cluster surveys in pink, the reproductive health surveys in green. So looking at the abortion estimates on the right, there's no data. The model produces estimates, but there's a massive amount of uncertainty in what the true abortion rate is. Here is El Salvador's trends in unintended pregnancy. Despite this massive uncertainty in abortion rates, because there's no abortion data, we're still able to estimate with 98% certainty that the unintended pregnancy rate declined over the analysis period, from 79 in the 90s to 58 more recently. And of course, the uncertainty in the intended and unintended birth rates is much smaller than in the unintended pregnancy rates. But even here, it's wider than in the intended and unintended birth rates for Peru, where we still have even better and more data on birth intention. Finally, let's compare El Salvador's, a country with no abortion data, to Peru, with a country with some abortion data. I'm not going to bother looking at a comparison of the abortion rates. Obviously, the model has pretty much no idea whether the abortion rates differed. Or maybe I am going to. Oh yeah, I do on the next slide, I forgot. Okay, so the point is, it does have some idea. You'd think obviously it has none, but it's still, look at this, in the 2000s, it's 98% sure that Peru's abortion rate 50 was greater than El Salvador's 24. So you have this massive amount of uncertainty in El Salvador's abortion rate because there's no abortion data for El Salvador. Nonetheless, in the period where we do have abortion data for Peru, we're still able to make a comparison and say with 98% certainty that Peru's abortion rate was higher. Of course, lacking abortion data, not just for these countries, but for the region as a whole, we're only able to say this with 88% certainty in the more recent time period. In any case, even with the uncertainty in the abortion rate in the more recent time period, we can still say with 96% certainty that the unintended pregnancy rate was higher in Peru than El Salvador in the most recent time period. So to wrap up, we produced an internationally comparable set of abortion and unintended pregnancy estimates. We used a theoretically grounded approach, which is appropriate especially when your data are limited. And we use a theoretically grounded approach to use all available data to concurrently estimate pregnancy outcomes, unintended and intended pregnancies, abortions, and the corresponding births. And we've shown examples of how this can be useful for various amounts and kinds of data. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jonathan. Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, esta conversación, como les decíamos, es la primera conversación que vamos a tener. Hemos compartido con ustedes la presentación para que puedan ver en detalle los datos y la metodología utilizada en la investigación, pero quisiéramos escuchar a nuestros panelistas con sus reacciones y tal vez preguntas para Jonathan en esta oportunidad. Así que quisiera darle la palabra a Guillermo Ortiz, experto regional de IPAS, que nos va a compartir sus opiniones al respecto. Guillermo.
Sí, muchas gracias por los datos y la explicación tan detallada del origen de los mismos. Sin intentar sacar conclusiones acerca de los datos compartidos, porque entiendo este modelo se basa en probabilidades de que estos datos pues sean obtenidos de forma correcta y que las estimaciones son más bien un acercamiento a lo que podría ser la realidad. Tengo algunas dudas, tal vez no tanto con la metodología que nos ha quedado muy clara, pero sí de la utilidad de los mismos. ¿Qué utilidad podríamos tener como región para estos datos, sabiendo, por ejemplo, que tenemos una gran deficiencia de datos en el tema de aborto? Y eso creo que se ha repetido innumerablemente durante la presentación. Y es por eso que se ha utilizado este método para hacer algunas estimaciones, ¿no? ¿Qué tanto se pueden tomar medidas de políticas en salud o hacer abogacía con los resultados de estos datos? Y esta es una pregunta también que se la hago a los expertos, y quiero hacer un comentario también acerca del origen de los datos. Entiendo que una parte del origen de los datos fueron extraídas de las bases oficiales de los países. Y ahí pues habrán algunas cosas que habrán que revisar. Y creo que nos lleva a un par de semanas atrás cuando hablamos en Clacay, en este mismo espacio, acerca de la definición de aborto. Porque nuevamente vamos a entrar en el tema de cómo se codifican los datos. Al menos hasta donde pude revisar antes de esta sesión, entiendo que la gran mayoría de países siguen las normativas de OMS, OPS, incluso del CIP-aborto, en donde se codifica aborto hasta las 22 semanas o 500 gramos. Por lo tanto, estaríamos dejando fuera una cantidad no despreciable de datos de abortos que han ocurrido después de estas edades gestacionales y que han sobrepasado este peso fetal. Nada más quería hablar de esto porque obviamente si los datos que nos comparten los ministerios de salud, que son los oficiales, tienen un sesgo en cuanto a la codificación. Esto por poner un ejemplo, si no se tiene un estándar de qué significa un aborto, tal cual ahora en la Clasificación Internacional de Enfermedades de la edición 11 sí lo tiene, en donde sí se habla de aborto independientemente del peso, independientemente de la edad gestacional en semanas, probablemente la calidad de los datos pueda comenzar a mejorar. Me da mucho la impresión que la gran mayoría de los datos que se comparten en algunos ministerios donde los contextos en el tema del aborto son muy restrictos o no existen, son muchos datos de abortos incompletos, abortos espontáneos, y creo que aunque existan como tal, por ejemplo en Guatemala, que hemos tenido oportunidad de estar un par de veces, sabemos que hay abortos inducidos terapéuticos, pero no son codificados como tal. Nada más dejo acá estas reflexiones y para permitir que participen otros también. Disculpas por lo largo de la opinión.
Muchísimas gracias, Guillermo. Creo que has tocado puntos muy importantes, tal vez de los más centrales que nos han convocado a esta reunión para entender mejor las fuentes de la información y también la utilidad, ¿no?, de una estadística, de unas estimaciones basadas en un modelo como el que nos ha presentado Jonathan. Si les parece bien, yo quisiera darle la palabra ahora a Rafaela Esquiabón, que es experta y consultora independiente, para que nos dé sus opiniones, y después escucharíamos a Fátima y ahí podemos nuevamente volver a Jonathan para que pueda reaccionar a estas consultas y comentarios. Rafaela, te escuchamos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias antes que nada por haberme invitado y pues es un gusto conocer a Jonathan. Me siento honrada, te he leído desde las primeras publicaciones y te felicito. Y espero que el COVID te trate bien y no te deje secuelas porque te necesitamos. Yo tengo, además de los comentarios que ha hecho el doctor Ortiz, tengo algunas preguntas en relación al modelo. Porque entiendo que finalmente el alfa lo siguen agarrando de los estudios de complicaciones, de las estimaciones por complicaciones. Es decir, es un dato que deriva de los estudios previos del Guttmacher en los diferentes países. No es un resultado de una nueva metodología, sino que lo asumen en el modelo, añadiendo otras variables. Me queda una duda, una serie de dudas al respecto. ¿Cómo difiere? Tú enseñaste ahorita la diferencia entre las estimaciones en México a partir del modelo de Guttmacher previo de las complicaciones y las estimaciones que derivan del tu nuevo modelo, que difiere de 2 puntos, 31 versus 33. En los otros países, en general, ¿cómo se correlaciona el modelo nuevo de ustedes comparado con el modelo antiguo, viejo del Guttmacher, para decir, para simplificar? Me imagino que sigue siendo correlado, porque si asumen el alfa a partir de esos estudios, no sé qué tanto cambie. La segunda pregunta me llama mucho la atención, las enormes áreas grises que observamos en todas las estimaciones en los años más recientes. Tú dices que esto deriva de la falta de estudios. Yo te quisiera señalar un estudio reciente que hicimos con el grupo de Blair Darney, analizando tasas de atenciones hospitalarias y no solo hospitalarias, que cubre hasta el año 2016, que fue publicado en la revista de Figo, donde encontramos un cambio importante en la tasa de atenciones hospitalarias y no. Probablemente driven por el aumento importante en el número de abortos legales atendidos en la Ciudad de México. Pero hay un cambio bastante importante, un aumento importante en la tasa de atenciones hospitalarias y no, insisto, porque tomamos en cuenta primer nivel de atención, atenciones en urgencias y hospitalizaciones. Mi pregunta es, ¿esta gran área gris solo se debe a la falta de estudios recientes? En años recientes, ¿cómo cambia el alfa para ustedes? ¿Lo asumen como fijo? Esa es un poco la pregunta. Y finalmente, ya una consideración menos metodológica y más general. Creo que la dificultad extrema de hacer estimaciones, sobre todo en la región, depende del uso del misoprostol. Es decir, el número de abortos Es como un rompecabezas, un puzzle, donde tenemos abortos que se hospitalizan por complicaciones, y yo dudaría un poco sobre la definición de complicaciones. Hay estudios en la región hechos por Mariana Romero, donde se estima la severidad de complicaciones, pero en general la mayoría de estas hospitalizaciones no son complicadas. Sobre todo no hay complicaciones severas, etc. Pero entonces tenemos las hospitalizaciones, los abortos en hospitales públicos. No sabemos nada de los hospitales privados. No sabemos muy poco de las atenciones en servicios privados. Por ejemplo, grandes servicios de atención de aborto inducido donde el aborto se legaliza. Hago un ejemplo, Mary Stopes en México. A partir de la legalización aumentó significativamente el número de atenciones para aborto legal, pero no tenemos ese dato. No sabemos el aborto autoinducido, self-use, el aborto acompañado, el teleaborto. Entonces, mi pregunta es, ¿a esta área gris no contribuyen todas este panorama tan variado que tenemos ahorita, que posiblemente impacte poco en las hospitalizaciones? Aquí termino y te agradezco y les agradezco mucho la oportunidad de comentar.
Muchísimas gracias, Rafaela. Jonathan, si te parece, vamos a escuchar a Fátima, que tiene sus comentarios también, y después te damos la oportunidad de contestar estas preguntas tan importantes. Fátima, muchísimas gracias. Fátima es...
Muchas gracias a ustedes por la invitación a participar como panelista, y también quiero agradecer a Goodmaker, a Jonathan, por la presentación que nos ayuda a entender un poco más las estimaciones obtenidas. Tengo unas preguntas. La primera es, para ayudar a prevenir los embarazos no planeados y los abortos inducidos, pues es muy útil tener esta información, tener estas tasas. Los países varían en cuanto a los datos que se tienen, como decía Rafaela, y varían también, en unos años se tienen, en otros no, pero cualquier dato que se tenga se usa para estimar, y es útil para estimar estas dos tasas. Sin embargo, en el caso de los países que no disponen de datos, no se tiene cómo se estima la tasa. Creo que lo dijiste ahí, y asociado a esto quiero decir el aborto inducido, que no tiene ninguna estimación. Si no se tiene ninguna estimación para el país, estoy suponiendo que utilizan los datos de la OMS, ¿no? O no sé, o sea, podrían explicar cómo funciona el modelo para estimar el aborto inducido, como los embarazos no planeados, para estos países que no tienen ninguna información de estas dos medidas. La otra pregunta que me interesa hacer es, las estimaciones que proporcionan ustedes son a nivel nacional y son muy útiles, quiero decir. ¿Existe alguna forma sencilla para que nosotros, los investigadores de Latinoamérica, podamos hacer estimaciones a nivel subnacional? Por ejemplo, la estimación del urbano-rural, qué fuentes de datos se necesitaría para hacer rápidamente, basándonos en sus estadísticas, estimaciones que provean por lugar de residencia urbano-rural. Y se mencionó que utilizaron diferentes fuentes de datos, incluyendo las estadísticas oficiales. O sea, lo que entiendo es que ponen todo lo que hay, incluyendo si hay estadísticas oficiales. Y yo quiero saber de dónde estuvieron las estadísticas oficiales. ¿La tomaron de una fuente centralizada como Naciones Unidas o contactaron a cada país para obtener la fuente oficial? Y continúo con este tema. Y las estadísticas o visiones sobre aborto inducido en países donde es legal, no tengo idea. No estoy segura si un país con el aborto ilegal tenga estadísticas oficiales de aborto inducido. Supongo que no, pero no sé. Pero ¿utilizan ustedes en estos países donde el aborto ilegal las estadísticas oficiales de aborto que provee el país? Y bueno, y estas no son preguntas, más bien quiero, bueno, uno, yo he tratado de buscar los datos, los cuadros, o sea, todas las estimaciones que ustedes tienen para esto y no los encuentro en Gutenberg. Si podrían indicar dónde están, no los encontré en el anexo de la publicación ni nada, entonces sería muy útil para que todos empecemos a usarla. Y una pregunta que más bien a todos, es que pues tenemos que promover la recolección de información del aborto y el embarazo no planeados. Pero ¿qué podemos hacer nosotros? ¿Cómo podemos pedirle a nuestros gobiernos? ¿Qué ideas tienen sobre cómo obtener esta información para que nuestros gobiernos estén interesados en recolectar información que se necesita para estas dos medidas que son muy útiles para prevenir el embarazo no planeado y el aborto? Y solamente añado una cosa de una pregunta que hizo, que pues seguramente lo va a contar, pero Rafaela, creo que tú conoces muy bien el AICM método, que es el que se usó para México y que hemos platicado y estado en eso. Guttmacher ha evolucionado en su metodología. Existe una publicación reciente, creo que del año pasado, donde ya se incluye la posibilidad del aborto del misoprostol y todo eso. O sea que ya en 2012 lo que conocíamos pues no es lo mismo que hacen en este momento Guttmacher con esta metodología. Sin embargo, el problema es que no tenemos los datos. No, muchos países no cuentan con esa información y bueno, y para tener estas estimaciones, pues se está utilizando pues lo que se puede, lo que hay ahí. Y entonces por eso es que digo que tendríamos nosotros como investigadores, como personas en organizaciones no gubernamentales, los que estamos interesados, promover, obtener esta información para poder así planear y empujar políticas adecuadas para reducir tanto el aborto como el embarazo no planeado. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Fátima. Y Jonathan, te damos la palabra para reaccionar a estos comentarios y preguntas.
Thank you all for those questions. So first of all, let's start with how useful these are. And the first thing to get at is these are probabilistic estimates. So is the model doing a good job at that aspect of like estimating these distributions? We've done a number of exercises to assess that. So for example, you can randomly exclude a fifth of all the data that we have, rerun the model, compare those estimates to what you get from the model when you include the data you just excluded. We can separately for each country, delete all that country's data, rerun the model, repeat that for every single country. That's called a country jackknife or a leave one country out validation. You want to assess that on average, when you exclude the data, if it's reliable data, if it's that the model should be equally likely to over and underestimate the truth. You want that the uncertainty intervals are well calibrated, that there's a 90% chance that the true value is within a 90% interval, that there's a 95% chance that the true value is in a 95% interval, and so on. We've done those exercises where we've deleted random portions of the data dozens and dozens of times, where for every single country, we've just excluded its data and rerun the model. We've looked at how the results validate separately for each type of data, separately for each type of data within each different cluster of countries. And the results are consistent with the model producing statistically unbiased estimates. That means the point estimates are equally likely to under or overestimate the true value. The uncertainty intervals are well calibrated. They are doing a good job of expressing how much uncertainty there is. With that said, the next thing you need to know is, well, are they useful? Depends on what you're doing. For me, showing uncertainty can be really useful because it's a nice summary statistic of like, please fund a study for God's sake. Why, like there needs to be in-country studies for a lot of reasons. But someone talked about Mexico. Okay. And I appreciate the mention of a more recent study. It might be a study of Mexico City only, but it can also, I don't know when exactly it was published, but it has to have been published within a particular time frame for when we were producing these estimates. But like, let's take a peek at our website, okay? Here's Mexico. Here's the percent of unintended pregnancies ending in abortion. We estimated that in the early 90s, 31% ended in abortion, and that in the most recent time period, 2015 and 2019, 51% of unintended pregnancies ended in abortion. There is uncertainty in that estimate, but we are more than 99% certain that the percent of unintended pregnancies ending in abortion has increased since the 1990s. That's a very reasonably high level of uncertainty to make that very important statement. And as I just told you, we did a lot of work where we just threw out data every which way we could to show whether the model was calibrated, whether it was accurately estimating these probabilities. I can compare any year. So let's compare to the early 2000s. I'm still, even over that shorter time period, I'm 94% certain that the percent ending in abortion has increased since then. More recently, there's less certainty. If I make comparisons between this period and this period, I'm only 80% certain. If I go back just over this period from the early 2000s to the present, I'm 94% certain that the percent of unintended pregnancies ended in abortion increased. If I compare 2000 to 1990, I'm 97% sure that just over those 10 years, the percent, just over those 10 years, 97% certain that between here with the 40 and here with the 31, 97% sure that the percent of unintended pregnancies ending in abortion increased. And again, over the entire time period, more than 99% certain that between 1990 and 2019, the percent of unintended pregnancies ending in abortion increased. That to me is very useful. Being able to say that the unintended pregnancy rate, we are 99% sure it decreased from 87 to 60. We're not 99% sure that the exact value of the decrease was 87 to 60. We're 99% sure that it decreased, right? And I can pick any two periods and say that between 2000 and 2015, I'm 93% sure that the unintended pregnancy rate decreased. That is really useful to be able to say, even as we are fairly uncertain as to the precise value of the abortion rate. But let's look at the uncertainty in the precise value of the abortion rate. Here's the bottom of the 95% confidence interval. Even that is, so that means that the true value is 97.5. There's a 97.5% chance that the true value is higher than where my mouse is, which is so much higher than what official statistics show. So there's a number of countries which have nonsensical official statistics. Someone asked, do countries that don't have legal abortion have official statistics? Yes, they do report made up official statistics. And even if you look at the bottom of our uncertainty intervals, it's still so much higher than in all of those countries as official statistics. So I do think that the estimate should be properly interpreted, accounting for the uncertainty. And I think being able to actually use that uncertainty to make probabilistic statements like, we are 90% sure of this, we are 99% sure of that, we are only 80% sure of this other thing, can be very, very, very useful. And so, by the way, maybe you want to compare a country to the regional average. Mexico is very similar to the region as a whole. You can pick El Salvador, Peru. We are able to make the statement that in the early 90s, we were more than 99% sure that Peru's abortion rate was higher than the Latin American average. In 2015, we're still able to say with 95% certainty that Peru's abortion rate, unintended pregnancy rate was 95% greater than the region's average. I think that those can be really useful statements. And I would also use the unintended pregnancy estimates, not just the abortion rates, because you were asked about, can this be useful for advocacy? Unintended pregnancy rates help people understand the prevalence of unintended pregnancy, which relates to the need for access to sexual reproductive health services, including safe quality abortion care in their areas. So those are examples of how I think that this work can be really, really useful. Someone asked about where the data is. It's in Appendix D in the paper. Also, you can go to this website and click this button and it'll download the country's data into a little PDF. So let's see what else was asked. Without data, did we use WHO rates? I don't know what a WHO rate is. So for every single country, we're reporting the estimate from our model. Every single country's estimate is affected by all of the data for its country, for all other countries, for everything. We produce these estimates in partnership with the WHO. So these are the WHO rates. We didn't use them, we produced them. Standard disclaimer, these are not quote unquote, countries may use their own estimates for blah, 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 blah. Could these be used to produce subnational estimates? We're not there yet. I wish we were. I'd love to have the time and funding to make that easier for people. Where did you get official statistics? From the governments themselves, from their websites, from physical reports, as well as centralized reporting agencies. The WHO sent out a circular letter to ministries of health and national statistic offices to their member states and requested that they review these data and asked them to comment and provide additional data. So we did literally contact the countries through official mechanisms through the World Health Organization. Regarding the availability of misoprostol, and this affecting estimates. So yeah, that's probably one reason why in general, we're seeing the percent of unintended pregnancies ending in abortion going up in countries where abortion is illegal. Certainly, you're gonna see this affect the in-country studies, the methods they use, because the multiplier would be expected to be much, much higher, but there's gonna be so much uncertainty in that. So you do see modifications to the methodology to do things like try and estimate misoprostol sales separately and include those in the estimates. Did we use official statistics? And do illegal countries have official statistics? They do. They're not. We treat them as minimum estimates. So they'll say that there's 10. The model will know with high confidence that more than some made up number of tiny abortions occurred, but it's minimally informative. Those are used as minimum estimates, not point estimates.
También tenemos algunas preguntas que fueron surgiendo en el chat que se relacionan con lo que estás comentando, Jonathan, que tienen que ver con la forma como se pueden contemplar o incluir los abortos autogestionados y los abortos que no aparecen o que no se registran en las estadísticas oficiales porque no están cerca del sistema de salud. Entonces, bueno, creo que un poco se dirigía ahí tu pregunta y estaba una discusión muy interesante en el chat acerca de cuáles podrían ser las posibles fuentes para tratar de incorporar ese dato, y una justamente era esta que acabas de mencionar, Jonathan, de las ventas de misoprostol o la cantidad de misoprostol disponible para la realización de abortos.
Right. So I think just to be clear though, that's not where those official statistics that you're talking about are really being used as lower bounds. I think that's more of a more relevant to the discussion when we're talking about high-income countries with really strong vital registration systems with legal abortion. And despite the fact that the health system may be strong, despite the fact the health system is strong, despite the fact that abortion is legal, some people may still obtain pills over the internet, and those estimates might be a little bit smaller. But I think we're focusing on Latin America, a country where abortion is highly restricted in general. So that's not, that's not really pertinent here, because the estimates, again, the official statistics are used as hard lower bounds. All they tell the model is that whatever you do, don't estimate lower than this. But the model is estimating nowhere close to those nonsensically low numbers anyway. So it's just, I'm not exactly sure I understand what the concern is.
Creo que la preocupación viene, si yo estoy interpretando bien el sentido, pero si alguien quiere participar, tenemos todavía unos 2 minutitos antes de cerrar. A partir de que las estimaciones que tenemos en este momento son un poco más bajas de las estimaciones que tenían los estudios previos, y entonces sabemos que ahora tenemos mejores datos, sabemos que hay digamos que los abortos y el acceso al misoprostol nos está generando otra accesibilidad en la región, a pesar de que haya todavía regímenes restrictivos. Tenemos cada vez más países con regímenes más permisivos respecto del aborto y mejores datos. Entonces hay ahí una pregunta para hacer, y eso se conecta con otra de las preocupaciones que expresaban en el chat, que tiene que ver con el uso político de los datos, con el uso de estos datos para la incidencia. Y eso conecta con el segundo encuentro que vamos a tener, y para el que les invito muy especialmente el próximo viernes a esta misma hora. Vamos a volver a reunirnos, también va a estar Jonathan presente, y vamos a tener un panel también de expertos, expertas que nos van a apoyar para tener esta conversación, y que se relaciona con el uso de los datos y con cómo podemos utilizar y aprovechar para la incidencia estas estimaciones y otros datos que tenemos disponibles acerca del aborto y el embarazo no intencional en la región. Ahí veo que Sushila está levantando la mano. Sushila, adelante.
Yes, I would just like to comment on the questions and comments to do with misoprostol, and recognizing the importance of studies to be conducted by country level studies to be conducted that do improve the measurement of the extent of use of misoprostol for abortions. We need new studies that can capture this. The global estimates utilize all available studies from countries. It doesn't generate those estimates, but it will take in to the prediction and the estimation process whatever studies have been conducted. So I am just making the point that it is true that to do a better estimation for the region of Latin America, we need new studies that can capture the extent of use and the incidence of abortion overall use, including the use of misoprostol, which is so hard to measure. And that's what I would make a strong encouragement for anyone who can advocate for such studies to be conducted. They will improve the next round of estimates tremendously. I just do not look to the global estimates to actually do those studies. That is not part of their mandate or feasibility. I don't know if I'm making that clear.
Yeah, so I'll just be really brief, and thank you, Sonia, for that clarification. In earlier years, in the 90s and the 2000s, abortion incidence studies tended to express rates per women ages 15 to 44. The rates are going to be higher compared to what we estimate, because our denominator includes more women. We have these rates expressed per women 15 to 44. That's simple to do. We have those in tables. If for some reason that's useful, if you're doing advocacy work where that is the denominator you're using, then we can just give you that number and it won't be lower. It's not that the abortion incidence is lower, it's differences in the fact in how these studies are defining a rate. The UN has standardized on women 15 to 49. Those studies tended to use women 15 to 44. If that is what is being used for advocacy, we can easily provide those numbers. We already have them. More broadly, so that was one of the questions. And I showed you, on the slides, I showed everyone an example for Mexico. The other thing to understand is that we do show that people are more likely to get abortion. Here's Latin America. The unintended pregnancy rate has declined from 94 to 69 over a 30-year period. The abortion rate has been relatively stable. In other words, the percent of unintended pregnancies ending in abortion has gone up from 37 to 47%. And we're 98% certain of this, that an increase occurred in this region. So there's many more abortions as a proportion of unintended pregnancies. When you're thinking about increases in access to abortion, this would be expected to affect the proportion of unintended pregnancies ending in abortion. The abortion rate is not the appropriate variable for analysis. Now, I totally respect and understand that one might dispute the estimated trends in the unintended pregnancy rate. I understand that some folks think that it shouldn't have declined this much. What I can tell you is that throughout the world where we have data, unintended pregnancy rates have been declining faster than would be predicted by contraceptive need and use and methods alone. We don't have a lot of data for the last 10 years on abortions in Latin America, but even in the 90s and 2000s, we were seeing this in Latin America. We're seeing this throughout the world. Unintended pregnancy rates are declining faster than would be predicted by contraceptive need and use and the contraceptive methods being used alone. That's a data-driven finding. And while it may not match what people's prior expectations are, we can't produce a model that fundamentally disagrees with what we're seeing with the data in every single region, consistently, country by country by country. That's why we predict a lower unintended pregnancy rate. And that is why, even with the percent of unintended pregnancies ending in abortion going up so much, as you would expect because of the widespread availability of misoprostol, you're not seeing increases in the abortion rates.
Muchísimas gracias, Jonathan. Creo que con esto hemos dejado abierta una conversación muy interesante acerca de los datos que tenemos, cómo hemos mejorado y cómo han cambiado no solo las formas de hacer estas estimaciones, sino también los datos disponibles y cómo podemos utilizarlos mejor. Así que yo les invito a que continuemos esta conversación el próximo viernes en este mismo horario. Vamos a enfocarnos ya no en la metodología para lograr la estimación, sino en, una vez que tenemos estas estimaciones disponibles, cómo podemos utilizarlas y cómo mejor lograr una incidencia a partir de estos datos. Yo le voy a dar la palabra a Sara Keogh, del Guttmacher Institute, para que haga un brevísimo cierre de este encuentro. Muchísimas gracias. Está silenciada, Sara.
Sí, perdón. Pues nada, gracias. Bueno, en primer lugar quisiera agradecer a Sonia y a Clacay por organizar este webinario. Ha sido realmente una gran oportunidad para debatir y comprender un poco mejor estas nuevas estimaciones que pueden ser un poco confusas a primera vista. Y en Guttmacher estamos muy contentos de poder compartir esas estimaciones con una amplia gama de actores aquí presentes que trabajan en la región. Y esperamos que esta presentación haya aclarado algunas de las dudas en torno a la metodología para obtenerlas. y que les ayude a todas y todos a poder utilizarlas para la incidencia, la investigación o la política. Así que gracias a Jonathan por su presentación, muy clara, creo. Y gracias a los panelistas por sus excelentes preguntas y a todos los participantes por sus intervenciones en el chat. Ha sido un placer compartir este espacio con ustedes y tenemos mucha ilusión verles al próximo webinario, que la semana que viene espero. Así que muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Sara. Muchísimas gracias a Susana y a Sushila que nos han acompañado y nos han apoyado en esta iniciativa. Gracias, Jonathan, y a todos los panelistas, las panelistas que nos acompañaron. Y bueno, nada, una cita para el próximo viernes para seguir discutiendo sobre este tema. Muchísimas gracias.